How many of you have to go to work today? Oh, man. Okay. There's just a lot here to reflect on, and I'm always feeling pressured by the people who have to get out of here. Okay. So yesterday we heard the gospel from John, where Jesus begins his ministry at the wedding feast of Cana. And for those of you who are at Annunciation, that led into a reflection that corresponded to Christ's bridegroom identity. And so it's a really beautiful follow-up today that he's being asked a question about his quote-unquote lack of discipline with the fasting, and his response is to contextualize their question in the framework of a wedding custom. So he answers them about their fasting. Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. Why would he say that? Well, first of all, in Greek, it's not the wedding guests. It's actually the sons of the bridal chamber. That's what it says in the Greek. And why this matters, think the groomsmen. So why this matters is because in Jewish custom, weddings were not just a day, they were a whole week, and all disciplines of fasting were suspended specifically for the sons of the bridal chamber because they were celebrating with the bridegroom the entire time. So he's saying to them, well, not only are we not fasting because we're actually in the middle of a wedding celebration, but if my disciples did fast, they would be denying my identity as bridegroom. This is a really wild statement. Then he says, however, the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast on that day. So at the end of the wedding week in Jewish custom, the sons of the bridal chamber who have designed the chamber for the new husband and wife to go to after their wedding, they then recede into the background, and then they actually go to mourn the loss of their friend. And so the fasting disciplines are reconstituted. And so when the disciples fast again is when Jesus is crucified and he's brought to the bridal chamber of the tomb, and they are mourning their friend. And so what Jesus is doing is contextualizing the entirety of his ministry in the framework of what the Jews understood to be a wedding. And this actually shouldn't be strange to them, because the Old Testament anticipation of the coming Messiah was one that was associated with the bridegroom of God's people. So he's actually stepping into the role that God told them was coming in their direction. We honor this, for example, when we fast prior to the Eucharist. We fast because our bridegroom is not with us, but when our bridegroom comes to us, we break the fast in the Eucharist. This is one of the reasons we do that as Catholics, beyond other practical ones, which is to make sure that we're seeing the Eucharist not as common food. It's also why our Lord then goes to say these very cryptic things, like no one sews a piece of unshrunken cloth on an old cloak. If he does, its fullness pulls away the new from the old, and the tear gets even worse. So what is he saying? He's saying that you are trying to impose the old covenant into something God is doing that is to be new. And so in order for the whole flourishing of what Jesus is doing as bridegroom and his people as bride, he has to institute a new covenant, which again, they were told through the prophet Jeremiah and should be expecting. Otherwise, the wine will burst. Likewise, no one pours new wine into old wineskins. So the new wine, remember, wedding feast of Cana, Jesus provides the wine into old wineskins. No, not the old covenant, the new covenant. And so all of this comes together, the bridal imagery, the wine imagery, the covenant constitution, all at the Last Supper. This is why also Jesus will say to them in John 14, I am going away from you, and where I'm going, I go to prepare a place for you, for my Father's house has many mansions, and when I have prepared a place for you, I will come back and I will take you to myself. Why does he say that? Because after the bride and the groom were married, they would actually split, and the groom would have a place prepared to receive his bride, which was in his father's house because they inherited, their ancestral property. And then his entourage would go out with her entourage, and when everything was ready, he would go and meet his bride, and he would take her into his Father's house, like literally. And so when Jesus is saying this to the apostles, he's fulfilling, again, that role of the groom. This has enormous impact, which we can't unfold today, but what I want you to walk away with today is that everything the church does is for a reason. That's what I want you to walk away with. This fundamental truth, this central truth of Jesus' identity as bridegroom, impacts pretty much everything we do as Catholics. Suddenly, the Mass becomes a wedding feast. Suddenly, skipping Sunday Mass becomes a really serious problem if you're supposed to be the bride and you're missing your wedding meal, right? That doesn't make sense. Suddenly, things like, for example, contraception and the church's understanding of that. When our Lord gives himself to the Eucharist, there's a nudity about it. There's a total gift of self about it, from the groom to his bride. Well, if we are made in his image and likeness, and sexuality is sort of a peak of that, and then we introduce contraception in there, there's a violence to our ability to image God and to be like him, because that's not how he gives himself to us. Could you imagine if we received the Eucharist and it had no life-giving power? That would be foreign. That would be foreign to us. And so, even though we may not in any given moment have all of these truths held together in this perfect tapestry of understanding, what it should hopefully evoke out of us in our sense of discipleship is a trust in the church, that the church gets it. And that when we follow her lead on things, it's not because she's about rules and discipline and she's strict, but because she knows what it means to be a faithful bride, and she will help us to do likewise by holding all of these truths in tension. And if we incline ourselves with docility towards her life and her disciplines and her habits and her beliefs, then we have the security of knowing that we are living truly our own bridal identity and dignity, and the mystery of life that Jesus is trying to fulfill in us is being accomplished even without our full comprehension.